Early healers depended on superstition and magic, followed by observations of injuries, wound healing, and dead bodies. So when did the practice of medicine begin, and who were the first medical doctors? While there are no straightforward answers to these questions, there is evidence from primitive societies that treatments were attempted for common conditions, although often superstitious and religious beliefs would be intermingled with these. We do know that from ancient Egyptian times, around 3000 BC, there were doctors. And in this context, the medical practitioner Imhotep, around 2600 BC, produced a written work chronicling over 200 different medical conditions. This evolved into experimentation and creation of new terminology for anatomy and physiology. Hippocrates, born 460 BC, is widely credited as being the father of modern medicine. One of his huge contributions in advancing the fields was the insight into the fact that diseases could have natural rather than supernatural causes. Also of enormous significance was his oath of conduct for physicians, which is still used worldwide today. Famous doctors from the Roman world include Galen, who dissected primates and attempted to extrapolate findings to the human body, although with limited success. Advances in public health were also important during this period, including some of the first sewage systems. Finally, study of corpses and cadaver dissection brought new knowledge of the human body. Leonardo da Vinci, working in the 15th century, contributed greatly to our understanding of human anatomy, with detailed sketches produced from careful dissection of human corpses. An important discovery in the 17th century was made by the well-known physician William Harvey, that the heart pumps blood around the body. The 19th century saw many advances. This was the age of the first uses of anesthetics, of the germ theory of disease, the first vaccines, and at the turn of the last century, blood groups were identified, paving the way for improvements in transfusion, the introduction of vaccines for conditions such as diphtheria, tuberculosis, and vitally, the development of antibiotics has revolutionized medicine. With the decrease in conditions that had previously decimated populations, came the rise in diseases more rooted in lifestyle, diabetes, heart conditions, and cancer. Anatomy is the study of structure or morphology of the human body and its parts. It's derived from a Greek word which means a cutting up. It requires a mastery of anatomical terminology. We can subdivide it many ways. Gross or macroscopic anatomy would include regional anatomy, which is all the structures within a certain region of the body, like all the structures within the arm or all the structures within the torso. Systemic anatomy is all the structures within a system of the body, like the circulatory system includes the heart, blood, and blood vessels. Microscopic anatomy is the study of structures that you need aid to see, like cells. Cytology is the study of cells, and histology is the study of the architecture of how cells link together to form tissues. Molecular anatomy is the study of the molecular changes in cells and tissues. Developmental anatomy is the changes in our body over time, how we go from being one fertilized egg into being a trillion cells working together to keep us alive. That's embryology, and then the changes in our body over time as we age. Pathological anatomy are the changes that accompany disease, and radiographic anatomy is the information that we can gain about the body and its parts using visual aids like X-rays. To study anatomy, we need a mastery of anatomical terminology. And then we need to gather information through observation. We measure data, collect it, perceive and notice things about the body, especially during an experiment. We might notice how often somebody breathes and how the rate of their breathing changes in certain conditions. Manipulation includes handling, controlling, or using something or someone. So you can see how the body handles a certain device, how the body can control and manipulate substances. Palpation is used to examine or explore the body by touching. That's what palpation is, to gain knowledge through touch, whether a muscle feels tense, about edema, and it can be used as a diagnostic aid. Auscultation is listening to the sounds of the body, chiefly to ascertain the condition of the thoracic or abdominal viscera. So listening to the sounds of your intestines as your food is digesting, listening to the sound of breathing. In gross anatomy, we consider large structures, such as the brain. Microscopic anatomy can deal with the same structures, though at a different scale. This is a slice of tissue from the brain, and once you stain it, you can see the neurons that are these larger cells, and then the neuroglia, the smaller cells that help take care of the neurons. Physiology is the study of the functions of the human body and its parts. It's derived from Greek for relationship to nature. Subdivisions are based on organ systems like the renal or urinary system, and cardiovascular physiology, or in response to changes like exercise physiology or pathophysiology. Physiology often focuses on the cellular and molecular level because the body's abilities depend on chemical reactions in individual cells. To study physiology, we need to focus at many different levels, from what the body system does together as a whole, to the cell functions and the chemical reactions that occur within them. And we need to study basic physical principles like the flow of electricity, how things move down pressure gradients, and how we can cause muscle contractions and movement of the body as a whole. And we also need to study basic chemical principles. The principle of complementarity says that the structure of organs and parts of the human body determines the function. Some structure-function relationships are obvious. For example, the heart is well designed to receive and pump blood, the teeth to tear and grind food, and the hinge-like elbow joint to permit bending of the arm. The structure of our hands gives it the ability to grasp and manipulate stuff. The ear is designed for receiving sound waves, and that information can be processed, and we can interpret the meaning of sounds. We are made up of atoms, which combine to form molecules, and macromolecules by combining many atoms, and they can form living structures known as cells. Cells can combine into sheets and rows linked together, and this is known as tissues. Tissues can combine to form organs. Organs form organ systems, and the 11 organ systems of our body form our human organism. In health, all parts of the body must be functioning together in a process called homeostasis. We'll talk more about homeostasis later in this chapter.
I like to think of life science as one big pyramid. Let's call the pyramid biological organization. Let's work our way from very small and specific concepts to very large and complex topics. So let's start at the tip of the pyramid with something so small it can't be seen by the human eye, a single cell. A cell by itself is the most basic component of life. A single cell, which is capable of living on its own, is called a unicellular organism. Organisms like bacteria or protists. These organisms are everywhere you look. You just can't see them. But when cells join together with more than one cell like itself to perform a similar function, it's no longer a unicellular organism. It's then called a tissue. No, not that kind of tissue. There are 4 types of tissues found in the human body: connective, muscle, nervous, and epithelial. Bone tissue is a type of connective tissue, and it's not flimsy like a Kleenex at all. Blood is also an example of the same cells working together to perform the same job, but it's a liquid, again, not like a Kleenex at all. No matter what the consistency is, A tissue is a group of the same cells working together to perform a similar function. Anytime there are different tissues working together, we then call it an organ. That's the next level of the pyramid. Animals aren't the only ones with organs. Plants have organs too. When we find multiple different organs working together to perform the same job, we then call it an organ system. Take the digestive system, for example. It's made up of a mouth, esophagus, stomach, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, small intestine, and large intestine, also known as your colon. Although each individual organ in this organ system does a very different job, together, these organs work to achieve the one goal of taking all the nutrients out of the food we eat and getting rid of what we don't need. An organ system, by definition, can only do one job, like get the nutrients from our food, send and receive electrical signals, or exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. Regardless of their individual function, all organ systems rely on one another to do the vital jobs which they can't do themselves. If one organ system doesn't work, the others will shut down too. An organism is a complicated living thing which requires the proper functioning of multiple organ systems to maintain stability. This stability is called homeostasis. When all organ systems are working together and maintaining homeostasis, then it results in a happy living organism. Organisms are incredibly diverse and can be as simple as a bacteria or as complex as you. When a group of the same organisms, also known as a species, live together in the same environment, we then call it a population. Often, there are several populations all living in one environment. That is what we call a community. Each time you look out the window, you're seeing a community. When we look at multiple communities, along with how all of the organisms interact with the physical environment, then we refer to it as an ecosystem. When you look at all the ecosystems of Earth together, you're looking at the Earth. The Earth is a big round circle of life. That's why we call it a biosphere. Bio meaning life, and sphere meaning circle. And there you go. When you break it down to each level, a very complex concept and phrase becomes easy to understand. All life starts with a single cell. When cells join together, they're called a tissue. A group of different tissues are called an organ, and a group of different organs are an organ system. A group of organ systems working together make up an organism, and a group of the same organisms are a population. Combining several different populations together give us a community, and several different communities in a large area is an ecosystem. And every ecosystem together makes up our biosphere. And that, my friends, is biological organization, the pyramid of life.
All materials, living or non-living, are composed of chemicals, which consist of atoms. Atoms themselves are made of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Atoms are the tiny particles that make up chemicals, like the atoms of hydrogen or the atoms of carbon or oxygen or nitrogen. Molecules are particles consisting of atoms joined together, linked together by bonds. H2O forms water. C6H12O6 forms glucose. Macromolecules are large particles consisting of molecules. These are complex arrangements of atoms, and they give us complex chemicals like deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, and various proteins. Macromolecules can combine to form subcellular structures known as organelles. These are functional parts of a cell, for example, a mitochondrion or a lysosome. A cell is the basic unit of structure and function. This would include nerve cells, muscle cells, or blood cells. Cells of similar structure and specialized function combine to form tissues, of which there are 4 primary tissue types: muscle, nervous, epithelial, and connective. Each tissue consists of cells of a specialized type, along with varying amounts of extracellular material. The term tissue is often used in clinical medicine to mean the aggregate of various cellular and extracellular components that make up a particular organ, for example, lung tissue or liver tissue. Organs consist of two or more types of primary tissue organized to perform particular functions. The stomach is an example of an organ. It is made up of all four primary tissue types, and the tissues of the stomach function collectively to store ingested food, move it forward into the rest of the digestive tract, and begin the digestion of protein. A body system is a collection of related organs. Each system is a collection of organs that perform related functions and interact to accomplish a common activity essential for the survival of the whole body. For example, the digestive system consists of the mouth, pharynx, commonly called the throat, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, salivary glands, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. These digestive organs cooperate to break down food into small nutrient molecules that can be absorbed into the blood for distribution to all cells. The body systems are packaged into a functional whole body, the organism. Each body system depends on the proper functioning of other systems to carry out its specific responsibilities. The whole body consists of the various body systems structurally and functionally linked as an entity that is separate from its surrounding environment. The body is made up of living cells organized into life-sustaining systems. The different body systems do not act in isolation from one another. Many complex body systems depend on the interplay among multiple systems. For example, regulation of blood pressure depends on coordinated responses among the circulatory, urinary, nervous, and endocrine systems. We can gain a lot of information using non-invasive procedures that provide images of internal structures. Ultrasound uses high-frequency sound waves that provide an echo signal that is converted by a computer into real-time images of soft internal structures. It's used to view internal body structures like tendons, muscles, joints, blood vessels, and internal organs, and fetal development. The advantages are that it's the least invasive of all imaging techniques, but the disadvantages include that the image quality is operator dependent, it is unable to penetrate bone and gas, and it can lead to a false positive cancer diagnosis. Magnetic resonance scan, or MRI, is a magnetic field that changes alignment and spin of certain types of atoms. It provides high-resolution images of internal structures such as the brain. It is particularly good for viewing soft tissues. It aids in diagnosing joint problems as well as torn ligaments and cartilage, herniated discs, and looking at organs like the brain, heart, and eye. It does not expose patients to radiation, and it can show swelling and inflammation. However, it has a high cost, and patients are often uncomfortable with the procedure. And it can dislodge iron-containing metallic implants, and it does not show tissue calcification, which is a feature of certain diseases. An X-ray is a form of electromagnetic radiation capable of penetrating solids to reveal internal structures. It is the most common diagnostic imaging technique, and it is cost-effective. Soft structures like tendons, ligaments, fascia, skin, fat, muscles, nerves, and organs appear gray, and hard or dense tissues like bones and teeth appear white. It's used to view and diagnose bone disease, degeneration, fractures, dislocations, infections, and tumors. It is cheaper to maintain X-ray equipment and easier to use than other techniques. However, the images are not detailed, and it damages cells and initiates changes that can lead to cancer. Here's an X-ray of a hand, and it allows us to see internal structures like the bones and the joints and joint spaces. Computed tomography, or CT, uses computers to analyze several cross-sectional X-rays to make a 360-degree image of internal organs. It has a very high level of detail and precision of organs, bones, and soft tissues. It can be used to diagnose cancer, heart disease, appendicitis, musculoskeletal disorders, trauma, and infectious diseases, and it can reduce the need for exploratory surgeries. However, it is expensive, and it exposes patients to doses of radiations many times higher than that of X-rays. Let's look at the characteristics of life. In order to be considered living, you need to be able to satisfy all of these characteristics. Living things have growth. Growth is an increase in cell number, also known as hyperplasia, but in single-celled organisms, they can grow too. That's just an increase in size. And our cells can grow in size. That's known as hypertrophy. Hyper means above, trophy means form, bigger form. So we can increase in cell number and cell size, and an increase in body size can also be due to non-cellular material around cells, like more mineral deposits within bones would make your bones thicker and stronger and your body bigger. Reproduction is production of new cells and organisms. The replacement of worn-out cells is known as renewal, and replacement of damaged cells is known as repair. In order to continue the species, we need to reproduce, so we make reproductive cells like eggs and sperm. Responsiveness is a reaction to a change inside or outside the body. And in order to stay alive, we need to be able to sense and respond to stimuli. For example, if you place your hand on a hot stove, then you need to withdraw away from the damaging heat, and so it will activate a withdrawal reflex. We withdraw from pain. We also use responsiveness to meet our body's needs, to control the breathing rate, blood pressure, and body temperature, which need to be adjusted in different situations, like whenever you're exercising as opposed to sitting and reading. Movement is a change in body position or location, but it can also include movement or motion of internal organs and contractility. We can move our body parts using skeletal muscles. You can move your arm or your leg, but we also move substances like the blood circulating through our bodies using the heart, cardiac muscle, and the movement of food along your digestive tract uses smooth muscle. We even move substances through cells, so a substance could come into a cell at one end of the cell. It could be used or modified as it moves through the cell and then exit the far end of the cell. Organization is maintaining boundaries between internal and external environments. The external environment is the surrounding environment in which an organism lives. A single-celled organism, such as an amoeba, obtains nutrients and oxygen directly from its immediate external surroundings and eliminates waste back into those surroundings. But in our bodies, a muscle cell or any other cell in our multicellular organism has the same need for life-supporting nutrients and oxygen uptake and waste elimination. Yet the muscle cell is isolated from the external environment surrounding the body. How can it make vital exchanges with the external environment with which it has no contact? The key is the presence of a watery internal environment. The internal environment is the fluid that surrounds the cells and through which they make life-sustaining exchanges. In order to be alive, we need to maintain organization so that our outside environment is separate from our internal environment. We separate the outside using skin and mucous membranes, but even inside our body, we need separation. The plasma membranes of our cells separate the extracellular material from the intracellular material. Metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in a living system. It is also known as energy production and nutrient cycling. Metabolism equals catabolism plus anabolism. Catabolism is the process of breaking larger, more complex substances into smaller, simpler molecules. I remember catabolism like catastrophe. It causes things to fall or break apart. In catabolism, we break bonds, and by breaking those chemical bonds, we release energy. Anabolism is the process of combining smaller molecules into larger, more complex substances. Anabolism makes chemical bonds. and it takes energy to make a bond. And once that bond is formed, there is energy stored within that bond. So metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in a living system, and metabolism equals catabolism plus anabolism. Respiration is making energy. Most organisms do it by taking in oxygen, using nutrients, and giving off carbon dioxide. This mainly happens in subcellular structures known as mitochondria. We will talk more about this in Chapter 3. Digestion is breaking down food into usable nutrients. When we're breaking apart substances, that's using catabolism, and it releases energy. These usable nutrients are then absorbed into the body and into the blood so they can be distributed throughout the body to our various cells. Circulation is moving chemicals and cells through the body fluids, and excretion is removing waste products. So these are the characteristics of life: growth, reproduction, responsiveness, movement, organization, metabolism, respiration, digestion, circulation, and excretion. The requirements of life are the substances that are necessary to keep the organism alive. This is different than the characteristics of life, which were the functions and processes that had to occur in order to maintain life. So these requirements, water, food, oxygen, heat, and pressure, are stuff that we need in order to maintain survival. And when we use these, they need to be replenished quick enough in order to stay alive. All of these factors need to be in the right amount. They're only good for you in the right amount. If there's too much, it could damage you. And if there's too little, then it could damage you. There's too much water, you drown. Too little water, then you die of dehydration. If it's too hot, then you get burnt. And if there's not enough heat, then you can't maintain life. So some of these substances are chemicals. Water is the most abundant substance in our body. It is the environment for metabolic processes inside and outside of our cells. It is the major component of intracellular and extracellular fluids. It's required for transport of substances and regulation of body temperature. Food provides the necessary nutrients to supply energy. This would include carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, minerals, and vitamins. And we need oxygen in order to release energy from food. Oxygen gets used up very quickly. We also require heat. Heat is a form of energy, and it helps maintain our body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. And it partly controls the rate of metabolic reactions. If we increase our body heat, it speeds up chemical reactions, and if we decrease our body heat, it slows down chemical reactions. But in order to maintain life, we need a certain rate of chemical reactions, about 100 degrees Fahrenheit at our body core, which is a little cooler at our mouth. We always say 98.6 because we breathe through our mouth, so they're slightly cooler when we measure it there. We also require pressure. Pressure is application of force on an object. We need atmospheric pressure. It's important for breathing. In order to get the oxygen to go through the membranes of our lungs into the blood so it can be delivered to our cells, we need atmospheric pressure to push it through. And we also need hydrostatic pressure. This is the pressure of fluid against walls of a structure like blood vessels, but hydrostatic pressure pushes substances through the walls of blood vessels so it can be distributed to our cells. Homeostasis is the most important concept in anatomy and physiology. We will relate everything we learn to homeostasis. Here are several definitions of this word, and I really want you to think about what they mean so that you can recognize the proper definition of homeostasis and even make up your own from one that wouldn't make sense. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment. Another way to say that is homeostasis is a dynamic, steady state of body systems that living organisms maintain. You could also say that homeostasis is a changeable condition meant to keep body functions in a narrow range compatible with maintaining life. See, body cells can live and function only when the extracellular environment is compatible with their survival. Thus, the chemical composition and physical state of its internal environment must be maintained within narrow limits. As cells take up nutrients and oxygen from the internal environment, these essential materials must be constantly replenished. Likewise, waste must be constantly removed from the internal environment so that they do not reach toxic levels. Other aspects of the internal environment are important for maintaining life, such as temperature, must be kept relatively constant, or the rates of chemical reactions will be too quick or too slow. This maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment is homeostasis. Homeo means similar, and stasis means to stand or to stay. The functions performed by each body system contributes to homeostasis, thereby maintaining within the body the environment required for the survival and function of all cells. Cells in turn make up body systems. This is the central theme of physiology. Homeostasis is essential for the survival of each cell, and each cell, through its specialized activities as part of a body system, helps maintain the internal environment shared by all cells. The internal environment must be kept relatively stable, but it does not mean that its composition, temperature, and other characteristics are absolutely unchanging. Both external and internal factors continuously threaten to disrupt homeostasis. When any factor starts to move the internal environment away from optimal conditions, the body systems initiate appropriate counter-reactions to minimize the change. So in a dynamic state of equilibrium, there is a normal range or set point. It is a restricted set of values that is optimally healthful and stable. For example, there's a certain level your blood glucose needs to be in order for you to be able to think clearly. This set point and normal range is maintained by the nervous and endocrine systems with contributions from all organ systems. And it involves continuous monitoring and regulation of all factors that can change. And we call these factors variables because they can vary. That's what we mean by a dynamic steady state. And so these variables can go up and down a little bit, but they have to be within a certain range. They can't go too far up or too far down without affecting the health of the organism. And so we need homeostasis to establish a set point to keep the variable within the range of the set point. For example, heart rate is controlled by homeostasis. If where you're sitting right now, your heart rate ideally needs to be at 70. If we were to continuously monitor your pulse, we would see that your heart rate doesn't just sit stagnant at 70. It actually could be 70 at one instant, but then go up to, say, 71 or even 72. But once it gets up to 72, well, it's getting too far to the edges of our normal range. So homeostatic mechanisms will be activated, which will decrease the heart rate. So it'll go from 72 down to 71 and 70 and 69 and 68. But once it gets down to 68, that's the low end of our optimal range. So we're going to activate homeostatic mechanisms to increase it. So it's going to go from 68 up to 69 to 70 to 71. And then again, we're going to lower it back down. These variables require continuous monitoring. And when they get to the edges of our optimal range, then they need to be regulated to keep them within this acceptable range. Factors that are controlled by homeostasis include concentration of nutrients like carbohydrates, lipids, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and waste products, the pH of the body, the amount of water, salt, and other electrolytes, the volume of the fluids inside and surrounding our cells, and the pressure of the gases and the fluids within the body. That would include like hydrostatic pressure and blood pressure. And then, of course, temperature. Temperature needs to be within a narrow range because if cells are too cold, their functions slow down too much. And if they get too hot, their structural and enzymatic proteins are impaired or destroyed. Even posture is controlled by homeostasis. You have a righting mechanism, and that if you start to lean over too far to one side, you will right yourself back up so that you can sit up straight. Homeostatic mechanisms are self-regulating systems that monitor aspects of the internal environment and correct them as needed. There are three parts of a homeostatic mechanism. There is a receptor, control center, and effector. The receptor is also known as a sensor or affector. You should actually pronounce that affector, but for clarity I'm going to say affector. The receptor monitors the environment. It detects changes and provides information about the stimulus. Generally, receptors only send information when the stimulus changes. So if it's monitoring temperature, it's going to send information once the temperature goes up or down a certain amount. The control center is the decision maker, and it determines the normal range or set point at which the variable is maintained. It receives input from the receptor and determines the appropriate response. And oftentimes, the appropriate response is to do nothing. The variable that we're monitoring is within the acceptable range. We only need to do something whenever it's getting towards the edges of the acceptable range. But when that happens, the control center will activate an effector. You should really pronounce it effector, but for clarity, I'm going to say effector. This is the actor. It is going to be always a muscle or a gland that responds to the control center, and it causes the necessary change to the internal environment. The effector's response can either reduce or enhance a stimulus. When it reduces it, we call this a negative feedback mechanism. And when it enhances the stimulus, then it's known as a positive feedback mechanism. So a stimulus is a change that occurs in the internal environment. Let's think about body temperature. If our core body temperature needs to be around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then we have receptors that tell the control center when there's a change. So if our body temperature goes down just a little bit, then it will inform the control center. And that change is compared to the set point. The control center determines the set point. And if the body temperature is getting too cold, then it will activate an effector, muscles or glands. And being cold, it would cause muscles to shake and make you shiver, oscillating muscle contractions, so that you could increase your body temperature. And so then that response would change the stimulus. It was too cold, but the shivering warmed up the body, brought the body temperature back into homeostatic range. Negative feedback is the most common type of homeostatic mechanism. Effectors, which are going to be muscles or glands, return conditions towards the normal range, and the deviation from the set point lessens. Because it is lessened, it is known as negative feedback. So the variable changes in the opposite direction of the initial change. If the initial change is that you were too hot, the negative feedback is going to cool you off. It's going in the opposite direction. If the initial change is that you were too slow, the negative feedback is going to speed you up. Speed is the opposite of slow. In negative feedback, A produces more B. But once you have enough B, then you want B to inhibit production of A. You don't want to keep having more A because then you would cause you to have more B. Negative feedback is our healthy mechanism for maintaining homeostasis. It's called negative because the response to the change moves the variable in the opposite direction of the deviation from the set point, and it prevents sudden, severe changes in the body. Negative feedback controls body temperature, blood pressure, and blood glucose levels. So let's look at an illustration of negative feedback. A room temperature to be set at 68. And if the temperature is too high, then the stimulus, the room temperature, is above the set point, it's higher than 68. Receptors will detect a change and tell the control center. And the control center will then cause the effectors in order to activate cooling mechanisms. This could include turning on the air conditioner or turning off a heater. And as a result, the temperature in the room is lowered back toward the set point. But if the room temperature was too low, stimulate a receptor to inform the thermostat of the change in temperature below the set point. Because the control center recognizes that it's below the set point, it will activate a change. It will cause the effector, in this case a heater, to turn on or an air conditioner to turn off. And in response, the room temperature would go back to the set point of 68 degrees. Our body temperature needs to be 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 when measured at our mouth. And so if our body temperature rises above that, then receptors will detect the increase in body temperature. And our control center for body temperature is found within our brain, within an area of the brain known as the hypothalamus. It determines the set point for body temperature. If it's informed that the body temperature is higher than its set point, then it will activate effectors, which would be in our skin. It would cause blood vessels in our skin to dilate. That releases heat to the outside environment, and it would also activate sweat glands to secrete sweat, which helps cool us further. This brings our body temperature down back into our homeostatic range. But if our bodies were too cold, well, then our receptors would detect the change in temperature below our set point. The control center would be informed of this change in temperature, and since it's below the set point, it would activate effectors. And so it's going to do a few things in response to being too cold. The hypothalamus will activate the skin, the blood vessels to constrict so that less heat is lost to the outside environment. And it will also activate muscle activity, oscillating muscle contraction, shivering, which helps warm our body up. And it brings us back into our homeostatic set point. Positive feedback is an uncommon feedback mechanism in the body. With positive feedback, the change or deviation is intensified instead of reversed. The variable continues in the same direction as the original stimulus, and it reinforces the stimulus. So if we have A causes us to produce more B, which would in turn produce more A, which would in turn produce more B, this would be like a snowball creating an avalanche, and it can exhibit a cascade or amplifying an effect. The activity of the effector is increased initially instead of decreasing. There are times when positive feedback is the correct mechanism, like in blood clotting and during childbirth. Even when positive feedback is used correctly, it is short-lived, and there are counter signals to suppress the positive feedback loops. Positive feedback can produce unstable conditions that seem like they will not lead to homeostasis, but there's times when they will, like in blood clotting and the uterine contractions of childbirth. Now remember, positive feedback is not our normal mechanism to bring homeostasis back. So if you were hot and you use positive feedback, it would make you hotter, which could damage your body. If your heart rate was too fast, using positive feedback, it would make your heart rate even faster, which could damage your heart. Positive feedback is used to intensify the stimulus. So in a positive feedback mechanism, we have a microphone that sends a stronger electrical signal to an amplifier. Therefore, the amplifier increases the electrical signal and sends an increased electrical signal to speakers, which that produces a louder sound. And then the microphone picks up the louder sound, and it causes even stronger electrical signals to be sent to the amplifier. And the amplifier increases its electrical signal, which increases the signal to the speakers, which makes it even louder. So here's a positive feedback mechanism on loudness. During pregnancy, the uterus puts even more oxytocin receptors on it. Whenever it's time to deliver the baby, oxytocin is released. It binds to the oxytocin receptors on the uterus, which causes contractions of the uterus. Those contractions push the fetus against the cervix of the uterus, and stretching of the uterus causes the brain to activate the release of more oxytocin. more oxytocin binds to the oxytocin receptors on the uterus, causing stronger contractions, which cause the head to stretch the cervix of the uterus even more, which causes the release of even more oxytocin. And in this way, oxytocin, which is also our love hormone, causes contractions of childbirth to push our babies out. And those same hormones cause you to fall in love with your little newborn. So in order to maintain homeostasis, we need to make sure that we drop off to ourselves all the things that we need them to have, and we pick up any waste that they produce so that the waste do not accumulate. So we're going to bring things in from the outside environment. We bring some things in through the digestive tract, like nutrients, salts, and water. And those substances that are not needed that we brought in should be eliminated from the digestive tract. But these substances that are brought into the digestive tract and absorbed through it into our internal environment will be picked up by the blood and distributed throughout the body. Also, within our internal environment, we need oxygen. So oxygen is brought in through the lungs and then again picked up by the cardiovascular system. And carbon dioxide is eliminated through the lungs to go to the outside of the body. The heart pumps in order to move our supply of nutrients, salt, water, oxygen throughout the body, and the urinary system helps eliminate waste and excess salts and water. And in this way, these systems work together to ensure that our internal environment has the right amount of substances and that wastes are eliminated properly. A disturbance to homeostasis increases the risk of disease and contributes to changes associated with aging. Over time, our control mechanisms can become less efficient. If negative feedback mechanisms become overwhelmed, destructive positive feedback mechanisms may take over, for example, in heart failure. Our body is highly organized. The human body consists of two main portions, the axial and appendicular. The axial portion is the head, neck, and trunk. It's the part of your body you can't live without. And the appendicular portion is your upper and lower limbs, or arms and legs. The major body cavities of the axial portion include the cranial cavity, which holds the brain, and the vertebral cavity, also known as the spinal cavity that contains the spinal cord. The thoracic cavity holds the lungs and thoracic viscera, which includes the heart and esophagus, some other important structures like the aorta. The abdominopelvic cavity contains abdominal and pelvic viscera. All of these cavities are closed to the external environment and provide different degrees of protection to the organs. The most protected are the cranial and vertebral cavities. The cranial cavity holds the brain, and the vertebral canal holds the spinal cord. The brain is the most protected structure of our body. The thoracic cavity holds the heart and lungs. It is separated from the abdominopelvic cavity by the diaphragm. So the abdominopelvic cavity includes the abdominal cavity and the lower area that known as the pelvic cavity. Within the torso, we have in the thoracic cavity, the area above the diaphragm, we have right and left pleural cavities, which hold the lungs. The mediastinum, which is found between the lungs. It includes the pericardial cavity, which holds the heart. And then the upper part of the mediastinum holds major blood vessels, like the aorta, subclavian veins. Below the diaphragm is the abdominopelvic cavity. The major portion of it is the abdominal cavity, and then where it narrows is known as the pelvic cavity. The diaphragm is the muscle that separates the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities. The mediastinum is the region between the lungs and the thoracic cavity, which contains the heart, esophagus, trachea, and thymus gland. The abdominopelvic cavity has two portions. The abdominal cavity, which extends from the diaphragm to the top of the pelvis, that contains the stomach, liver, spleen, kidneys, small intestine, and most of the large intestine. And the pelvic cavity, enclosed by pelvic bones, and contains the end of the large intestine, urinary bladder, and the internal reproductive organs. In our head, we have small cavities lined by mucous membranes. They include the oral cavity inside the mouth, the nasal cavity inside the nose, the orbital cavities of our eyes, and the middle ear cavity. Mucous membranes line the parts of the body that are open to the outside and are exposed to air. Mucus facilitates the movement of mucus and protects against toxins and infectious agents. Cavities exposed to the outside environment and continuous with the skin at various body openings include the oral and digestive cavities, the nasal cavity, the orbital cavities of the eye, the middle ear cavities, and the urogenital cavities. Technically, our digestive tract is outside of our body. For example, if you were to eat an apple and the apple goes into your mouth and then is swallowed into your pharynx, which is your throat, and then it goes down your esophagus into your stomach, the apple, which is inside your stomach now, is not actually part of your body. It needs to be absorbed. Well, it needs to be broken down into pieces, and then those pieces need to be absorbed through the mucous membranes of your digestive tract in order to actually get into the true internal sterile spaces of your body. And the parts of the apple that aren't absorbed stay within your digestive tract, and then they're eliminated as poo. When you think about these mucous membranes lining these internal spaces of your body, they're lining parts inside your body that are actually technically outside of the body. The parts of your lungs where the air comes in and goes inside these mucous membranes, that is outside, external to the body. There are some body cavities that are not exposed to the outside environment, and they're found within our joint cavities. They're known as synovial cavities. So you have synovial cavities inside your elbow and shoulder. The thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities are closed to the outside environment and are lined by double-layered serous membranes. These membranes secrete serous fluid, which looks like water, but it's very slippery water, and it prevents friction between the organs. The serous membrane consists of two layers: the visceral layer, which lines the organ, it's the inner layer, and then the parietal layer is the outer layer, and it lines the wall of the cavity. If you were to have a balloon that didn't have very much air into it, then you could punch your fist into the balloon, and the part of your fist that is covered by the balloon would be the visceral layer, and then the part of the balloon which isn't touching your fist would be the parietal part. So for the heart, the pericardium surrounds the heart. It's the serous membrane of the heart. And then the parietal pericardium lines the outside of the mediastinum. So let's look at some examples of serous membranes. There is a visceral and parietal pleura. The visceral pleura is sectioned up against the lungs itself, and then the parietal pleura is sectioned up against the inside of your thoracic cavity. And so these two walls have a fluid in between them. We call it pleural fluid. The visceral pericardium lines the heart, and the parietal pericardium lines the mediastinum. And between the parietal and visceral pericardium is fluid known as pericardial fluid. So water-like, slickery fluid. Around the abdominopelvic organs, there is a peritoneum. Here's the serous membranes of the abdominopelvic cavity. This is the liver. So the visceral peritoneum lines the liver, and then the parietal peritoneum lines the inside wall of the abdominopelvic cavity. And between these two layers is peritoneal fluid. Each of the body's 11 organ systems includes a set of interrelated organs that work together to provide specialized functions. The maintenance of homeostasis depends on the coordination of organ systems. The integumentary system is the skin and its related structures like hair, sweat glands, and nails. It covers the body and it protects us. It helps regulate our body temperature. It contains various types of sensory receptors, and it allows us to produce vitamin D. The skeletal system is the bones and joints. Skeletal system aids in support and movement. It provides a framework and protection. It provides attachment sites for muscles. It stores inorganic salts like calcium, and inside our bone marrow, it produces blood cells. The muscular system is made up of the muscles, which includes skeletal muscles, the heart, and then the smooth muscles within our various organs. And they give us support and movement. They're the main source of body heat. They provide us with posture. The nervous system is the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sense organs. It's one of the body's two major regulatory systems. In general, it controls and coordinates body activities that require swift responses. It integrates and coordinates organ function through nerve impulses and neurotransmitters, and it has rapid, short-term effects. The endocrine system is all hormone-secreting glands, which include things like the thyroid gland, thymus, testes, ovaries, kidneys, pancreas. It integrates and coordinates organ function through chemical messengers called hormones. In contrast to the nervous system, the endocrine system in general regulates activities that require duration rather than speed, such as growth. It is especially important in controlling the blood concentration of nutrients and, by adjusting kidney function, controlling the volume and electrolyte composition of the extracellular fluid. It has longer lasting effects. The cardiovascular system is made up of the heart and blood vessels, which include arteries and veins. It transports gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients like glucose, amino acids, lipids. It transports blood cells, hormones, and waste. The lymphatic system is made up of lymph vessels, the thymus and spleen, and it transports fluids from tissue spaces to the blood. It carries fats from the digestive system to the blood, and it defends our body against foreign invaders such as bacteria and viruses, and against body cells that have become cancerous. The digestive system includes the mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestines, and related organs. It breaks down dietary food into small nutrient molecules that can be absorbed into the plasma for distribution to the body cells. It also transfers water and electrolytes from the external environment into the internal environment. It eliminates undigested food residues to the external environment in the form of feces, which I like to call poo. The respiratory system is the lungs and major airways, and it gets oxygen from and eliminates carbon dioxide to the external environment. By adjusting the rates of removal of acid-forming carbon dioxide, the respiratory system is also important in maintaining the proper pH of the internal environment. The urinary system is made up of the kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. It removes excess water, salt, acid, and other electrolytes from the plasma and eliminates them in the urine along with waste products other than carbon dioxide. It produces urine and excretes it by transporting it to the outside of the body. The reproductive system includes the male and female gonads, that's the testes and ovaries, and the related organs. The reproductive system is not essential for homeostasis, and therefore is not essential for survival of the individual. It is, however, essential for perpetuating the species. The male and female reproductive systems produce and transport sex cells, which are sperm and eggs. They produce hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and they produce new organisms. The female also provides for fetal development and childbirth. Here's a summary of the organ systems with the major organs and their major functions. In this class, you will be expected to use proper anatomical terminology. Sometimes you could give an answer that would be correct, but if it's not the proper anatomical term, it would be incorrect. When we talk about the human body, we always assume anatomical position. This position is standing erect, facing forward, with your upper limbs to the sides and the palms facing forward. And for the male, the penis would be erect. Whenever you picture the body, and when we describe the various parts and where they are in relation, they are always described by default from this position. Anatomical terms of relative position are based on this standing person. Directional terms describe one body structure in relation to another body structure. Always use directional terms as if the body is in anatomical position. And when you use right or left, you will refer to the body being observed. So in reference to the patient that you're observing and not those of the observer. So terms of relative position include superior, also can use the term cranial, that means above or towards the head, and inferior, you could also in humans use caudal, that means below or towards the feet. Anterior means in front of or towards the front, and the term ventral means the same thing in humans. And then posterior or dorsal means towards the back of or back. Medial means towards the midline, and lateral means away from the midline. Most of our body has bilateral or paired structures. That structures on both sides. We have arms on both sides, legs on both sides. Ipsilateral means same side, and contralateral means opposite sides. So ipsilateral leg, if you're talking about the right leg, the ipsilateral arm would be the right arm. But contralateral to the right leg would be the left arm. Proximal means close to the point of attachment. We use the terms proximal, distal, specifically for limbs. So proximal means closer to where the limb attaches to the body. So the shoulder is proximal to the elbow because the elbow is farther from where the upper limb attaches to the body. Distal means farther from the point of attachment to the trunk. So the fingers would be the farthest, most distal part of the upper limb. Superficial means close to a body surface, and deep means deeper inside the body, more internal. Oftentimes, to describe where things are, we picture the body as if you were to cut it, and we cut the body into different sections using different planes. If we were to cut the body using a sagittal section is a longitudinal cut that divides the body into right and left portions. So a sagittal cut through here would allow you to see the body. Here you can see the brain and the spinal cord, the mouth and the nose. This is a sagittal view, sagittal section. You can divide the body right there at the midline. That's known as a mid-sagittal or median section, and it divides the body into equal left and right portions. But you can also do a parasagittal section in which it's more lateral, so not on the midline, and it divides the body into unequal left and right portions. A horizontal or transverse section divides the body into superior and inferior portions. And so that's a slice through the body which would let you see all the organs here through the abdomen, or this slice here through the elbow joint. And then a coronal or frontal section is a longitudinal cut that divides the body into anterior and posterior portions. That would allow you to look here along the leg. It's showing the knee joint if you did a coronal section. When we look at various sections of the brain, this is a sagittal section through the brain. It's dividing it into right and left portions. It's a mid-sagittal section specifically. It looks different than horizontal or transverse section that allows you to see the brain from a different view, or a coronal, which separates it from front to back, and again gives you a different view. Whenever we look at the body, especially when we look at sections or parts, it's important to keep perspective. If you blindfold a bunch of scientists and ask them to describe a certain small region of their subject, you might have a different perspective. So here we're looking at an elephant as a whole. This scientist thinks the tusks are a spear. This one thinks that the trunk is a snake. This one thinks that the legs are trees. The ears here are fans. The body is a wall, and the tail is a rope. But if we put all these different features together, what would make the most sense is all these features are found within elephants. And as we look at the body, we need to think about the size of things and how they would fit together into a context so that we can understand them as a whole, because they are 3D structures. If we were to take sections of a cylinder, then a cross section would give us circles, and an oblique section would give us ovals, and a longitudinal section would just give us 2 long lines. And when we look at the kidneys, which are made up of tubes, we see longitudinal sections and oval sections and circular sections. When we put that together in a 3D context, we understand that we're looking at tubes, or tubules, renal tubules, small tubes within the kidneys. If we look at a neuron along the axon, whenever you cut through it, you can see that the inside of the axon here, and then it has wrapped around it these layers of myelin as a longitudinal section. And again, inside here you can see the axon, and then you can see the many layers of myelin that are wrapped around it. There's a term that we will use often. It is lumen. Lumen is the inside space of a tubular structure. So if you have a garden hose, the lumen is the part of the hose through which water would move. So this is the lumen of a tube, and so these spaces inside here are lumens. Where blood flows through blood vessels is the lumen. Anatomists divide the abdomen into various regions and quadrants. There are 9 abdominal regions. You need to be able to identify the regions and which organs are inside the region. So if we look at the middle, where the belly button would be, that is known as the umbilical region. It holds the transverse colon, small intestine, and the ureters. Above it is known as the epigastric region. Gastric means belly, and epi means above. So it's the upper part of your belly, the epigastric region, and it contains the liver, stomach, some pancreas, and adrenal glands. And then below the umbilical region is known as the pubic region, but you can also call that the hypogastric region. It's the lower belly. It contains the uterus and urinary bladder. And then remember, we use right and left in perspective to the person that's being observed, the patient. But we have hypochondriac regions on each side, the right and the left. The left hypochondriac region holds the parts of the stomach, pancreas, and spleen. And notice this term hypochondriac, you've probably heard it before. Hypo means lower, and chondro means ribs. Hypochondriac is the lower part of this cartilage of the ribs. Now, this same term, hypochondriac, can have a wildly different meaning. It means someone who thinks they have a disease that they don't. It is the same term and it's spelled exactly the same way. But in this context, we're referring to this lower area of the ribs. And so this is the left hypochondriac region, and this is the right hypochondriac region. On the right side, this region contains the liver and gallbladder. The middle side portions are known as the left and right lateral regions or lumbar regions. The left lumbar region contains the left kidney, the descending colon, and the small intestine, and the right lumbar region contains the right kidney, the ascending colon, and the small intestine. And then we have right and left inguinal regions. The left inguinal region has the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and left ovary, and the right inguinal region contains the appendix, cecum, and right ovary. Another way to divide the abdomen is into quadrants. We have a right upper quadrant, which contains the liver, gallbladder, small intestine, right adrenal gland, and right kidney, the ascending colon. And then there's the left upper quadrant, which contains the stomach, spleen, pancreas, left adrenal gland, left kidney, and descending colon. The right lower quadrant has the right kidney, ascending colon, cecum, appendix, and right ovary. And the left lower quadrant has the right kidney, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and left ovary. The superficial regions of the body have terms which you should know. Cephalic means head. You can also use cephalic as a directional term, like towards the head. Cephalic means head. Frontal is this area of your forehead. It's known as the frontal region. Orbital means eyes. That's your eye cavities. Otic means ear. Nasal means nose. Oral means mouth. Buccal means cheeks. Your chin is known as your mental region of your body. Sometimes people have a dimple in their chin. That's known as a mental dimple. And then your neck is your cervical region. With your spine, we divide it up into regions. Often when we talk about the spine, we talk about the cervical region of your spine. And then we have a thoracic region of the spine and a lumbar region of the spine. Near the shoulder, there's an acromial region. The axillary region is your armpit. Mammary region are the breast, and they also cover the pectoral region. And so sometimes it's hard to discern pectoral from mammary. You need to use context to figure out which one is the correct term, or either could be the correct term. Now, the middle of the anterior front chest is known as the sternal region, because that's where the sternum, your breastbone, is located. The brachial region is your upper arm, the area between your shoulder and your elbow. And then your antebrachium is your lower arm, the area between your elbow and your wrist. In anatomical position, the front of the elbow here is known as your antecubital region. That's where we draw blood. And the back of your elbow is known as the cubital or olecranon region. The wrist is known as the carpal region, and then the palm is known as palmar, and then your fingers are digital. We already talked about the regions of the abdomen, but in general here, we're just going to call this all abdominal region with the umbilicus here in the middle. And then the lower part of this region is the pubic area. We have the inguinal lateral to each side here, the lower part of the torso. Below the pelvic region is the pubic or genital region. The hip area is known as coxal. Lower limb, the area between the hip and the knee, is known as the femoral region of the body, commonly called the thigh. The anterior or front of the knee is known as the patellar region, and the back of the knee is known as popliteal. The lower leg as a whole can be called the crural region of your body, but just the back of the lower leg, the calf, is known as sural. So crural includes all the lower leg, front, back, middle, and sural refers to just the back, the calf area of the lower leg. The ankle is known as the tarsal region. The foot is the ped or pedal. The heel of your foot is known as calcaneal. You have digits for toes. And then the bottom of your foot, the part that you stand on, is known as the plantar. You plant your feet, the plantar region of the body. Now, on the posterior torso, as a whole, we can call all of this dorsal, the back of your body. Along the spine, we often define the vertebral region as to being cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. The thoracic is the area where there's ribs. Now, thorax does refer to the part of your torso that is below your neck but above the diaphragm. And it holds, your thorax holds your heart and your lungs. And so the term thoracics includes all the stuff all the way from the front through the middle and into the back. But if we talk about thoracic spine, then that's just this vertebral area where there's ribs, and then below that is the lumbar spine. Below the lumbar is the sacral area. It's found between the hips. And then the gluteal regions are where your gluteal muscles are found. The perineal region is the area commonly called the taint, but it's between the genitals and the anus. So let's look at some practice questions using some anatomical terms. Which statement is correct? Are the ribs superior to the chin? No, the chin is superior to the ribs, so this would be an incorrect statement. Is the chest inferior to the stomach? No, the chest is superior to the stomach, so this is an incorrect statement. The hip is superior to the shoulder? Absolutely not. The shoulder is superior to the hip. Hip is inferior to the shoulder. So this is not a correct statement either. The neck is superior to the pelvis. Now this is the correct statement. The neck is superior to the pelvis. Which anatomical term would best describe the back region of the body? Well, ventral means front. Gluteal means just the area where your gluteal muscles are. They are found on the back of your body, but it's a very small area. But dorsal is the best term because it is in general the whole back region of your body. Always remember that dolphins have a dorsal fin, and so the dorsum is your back area of your body. So which statement is incorrect? The knee is distal to the hip. Well, that's correct. The knee is distal to the hip, so that's a correct statement. The hip is proximal to the ankle. That's correct. The hip is closer to where the lower leg attaches to the body than the ankle is, so the hip is proximal to the ankle. How about the shoulder is distal to the elbow? Now that's incorrect. The shoulder is closer to where the upper limb attaches to the body than the elbow is, so the shoulder is actually proximal to the elbow, so this is an incorrect statement. C is incorrect. The elbow is proximal to the wrist. That is a correct statement.